desirelessness. First, it's important to clarify something. Desire in and of itself is not actually wrong. The problem is that desire tends to come in the package deal of expectation and attachment. I have a desire for something, and that's wrapped up in my expectation that I will get it, and an attachment to getting it. And since nothing in the world outside of my own self is actually in my hands, whereas desire and the fulfillment of it, almost always, unless it's a personal spiritual desire, otherwise it tends to be in the hands of things around me. I desire a raise. I desire this job. I desire that so-and-so should like me or ask me on a date. I desire that my goal should be fulfilled, which means other people should come together in support of that goal. Well, the problem with that is that since that's not in my hands, inevitably, at some point there's going to be an unfulfilled desire. And that tends to lead to frustration, sadness. And this is where Pujya Swamiji speaks so much about letting go of desires. It doesn't mean we become complacent. It doesn't mean we become indifferent. It doesn't mean that we walk by suffering and think, well, so be it. I have no desire for things to be different. It's not that. What it is simply is letting go of the attachment to that desire being fulfilled. You know, we speak all the time about not viewing the universe as a vending machine. With a vending machine, you tend to get your way. You walk into it, you put your money, you push your button for what you want, and it comes out. But in life, so frequently we do our best, we put in our money, we flatten out the dollar so it's all, you know, nice and crisp, we put it in the right way, not too fast, not too slow. We push the button, but sometimes nothing comes out at all. Sometimes what we didn't want comes out. And that becomes the fodder for our disappointment, our frustration, our anger. Then we react out of anger. We kick the vending machine. Right? So that's where the teaching of becoming desireless comes from. But I want to just touch upon another point on that as well, which is that the state of being desireless is actually a state that we all should strive to achieve. And I'm going to come back in a moment to the difference between desires and goals. Because just because we strive to be desireless doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals. But we strive to be desireless because the state of desirelessness is actually the most joyful state. Let me clarify. You desire something. Let's take it as something as simple as a pizza. Oh my God, I haven't had a pizza in so long. I need a pizza. Okay. Now I'm thinking about this pizza. My mouth is watering every time I think about a pizza. Every restaurant I walk by, I look in the window to see if maybe it's gonna have pizza. It doesn't have pizza. Now my whole life has become pizza focused, right? Finally, I find a place that has pizza. I'm ecstatic. I go inside, I order a pizza, it comes in front of me, I smell it, right? I'm in ecstasy. I take a bite of that pizza, I start to eat the pizza. I'm full of joy. Now, this is the crux. I associate the joy with the pizza, but actually something much, much more subtle has happened. Why am I in so much joy? Because I no longer desire pizza. It's a subtle difference, but it's a very important difference. The joy that we get in the fulfillment of our desires is actually not in the thing itself. And I can show this to you scientifically. What we know from science is that all of these sensory neurons in our body, taste, smell, sight, respond to newness. The first bite of the pizza is glorious. From bite number 2, literally the sensors, my taste buds, and all of the associated cells in my brain that process pleasure are now no longer responding because it's no longer new. By the time I'm at the 6th or 7th bite, I'm not even tasting the pizza. This is actually science. We respond to newness. But most of us are not subtle enough to notice that. And so I've identified my great joy with the pizza. Whereas actually, what's happened is that in the midst of eating the pizza, I'm no longer desiring pizza. For a brief moment, I'm desireless. I had wanted it so badly. I'm now free from the clutches of my desire. And the problem, because we don't pick up that subtlety, is we start to now have a new desire. Oh, after my pizza, God, I really need a chocolate ice cream cone. This pizza's just not going to be complete until I have a chocolate ice cream cone after. Right? So now I desire the chocolate ice cream cone. And then, oh God, but you gotta cappuccino. Pizza, ice cream, cappuccino, right? And this is how we go on. Because each thing brings us joy. And we don't actually stop and investigate subtly and deeply enough to realize that it's not actually the intersection and interaction of the cheese and my tongue that is so joyful. It's that I'm no longer desiring that. And so the other motivation for becoming desireless is to be able to live in a near constant state of joy, because I'm no longer waiting for something else to bring it to me. So that's really the spiritual motivation for being desireless. Not that desires themselves are evil, but that if I keep having desires, I'm not letting myself live long enough in the joy of no longer having the desire. Which means I'm depriving myself of my birthright, my true nature, which is joy, which is infinity. Lastly, coming back to the point of goals. There is suffering in the world. Whatever level of existence we want to say that suffering exists on is a semantic debate. It's an interesting one. It's a very interesting philosophical debate. We can talk about the different levels of reality. But I don't want to go there tonight. On certain levels of existence, there is suffering. And when we have deep spiritual practices, we begin to develop a disillusion of the borders between us and others. And when that happens, our ability to tolerate the suffering of others actually becomes less and less. We become more and more permeable to the suffering of others. Now that's very different from victim mentality and identification with others, because it allows me to wallow in my own pain. I was abandoned as a child, therefore now I feel really sorry for orphans, and I cry when I think of orphans. That's not what I'm talking about. That has to do with the fact that I haven't yet dealt with my own childhood, and therefore it's a lot easier and safer to cry tears for other orphans than for my own childhood. I'm talking about a much, much more spiritually evolved state where this other actually becomes self, where that which our spiritual sages and saints have told us of all the religions forever, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, you can't love thy neighbor as thyself until you see thy neighbor as thyself. First, you have to realize thy neighbor is thyself before you can even begin to love him as such. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, why? Because they are you. So whatever our religious, spiritual background is, we're told over and over again, we all are one. That's what ultimately the word yoga means, union. That union with the whole divine. So as we unite, as we start to experience that, people's pain becomes our pain. Which is why service is such a natural outcome of spiritual practices. Which is why great enlightened masters serve. Not because, they have to put sticky notes on their computers that say, do a nice thing today. Engage in one random act of kindness today, right? Most of us have to remind ourselves, oh yeah, I forgot to do my random act of kindness. The world is self. So they serve. And in that service, there are goals. The most general one being, I would like to alleviate as much suffering as possible. It's a beautiful goal. It's a goal that spurs all sorts of actions and programs and projects. But what the goal doesn't have is an attachment or an expectation that that suffering is going to be alleviated in exactly the way that I envision. That it's going to be alleviated through a program or project that I put into place. That people are going to know I'm the one who alleviated that suffering. That it's going to be alleviated on my timeline. So you have goals. But without that which turns goals into frustration and despair. Typically our goals are, as I said, wrapped up with the expectation, the attachment, our own ego, our own vision, it has to be this way. I mean, if you look at so many of us involved in, NGOs, any volunteer work, ultimately the goal is service. But the ego creeps in really insidiously. Here we are all working for the benefit of humanity. But you'd be surprised still at how general human traits are still so present, and you start to see fighting and competition of it's going to be this way, it's going to be that way, it's going to be my way, it's going to be his way, and it's going to be my name or his name. And then you realize, well, let's be honest with what my goal was. Because if my goal was just alleviation of suffering, then it shouldn't matter to me whose way, whose name, whose timeline. If my goal was self-glorification through things that look like alleviation of suffering, well, that's a completely different goal. Not nearly as noble of one. So we have to be clear of what our goals are when we start to find ourselves frustrated at them not being fulfilled.